the high 20s. So still a pretty warm day across eastern areas of England tomorrow. That wet weather will linger across eastern areas of England, though, through Wednesday morning, and elsewhere it will be a much drier and brighter day. Still feeling fairly pleasant in the sunshine, but nowhere near as warm as it is at the moment. And then looking ahead to Thursday, it looks like a more widely wetter day. However, the sunshine is set to return for Friday. Temperatures around average for the rest of the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. There are long queues heading east through West Yorkshire tonight along the M62 from junction 26 to 27. A lane's blocked towards Leeds, just off the Gilderson roundabout off the M621, where a lorry's broken down. It's taking about 25 minutes and 6 miles of queues back to 25, the Brighouse turn-off. And also in West Yorkshire, southwest of Otley and Menston, the Bradford Road is closed off the A65 after a fire broke out in a building at a scrapyard. In Lincolnshire, south of Grimsby, a serious accident has closed the A16 at Holton, the Clay not being helped, of course, by the roadworks on that stretch. And in Cambridgeshire, east of St Neots, just west of the Caxton Gibbet roundabout, the A428 is closed after a lorry and a van and a camper van were involved in an accident. On to the M3, that's still blocked northbound in Hampshire, junction 9 north of Winchester off the A34. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christies. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christies tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GBN Tonight. On today's show, one of London's busiest tourist hotspots was struck with terror today after 2 people, including an 11-year-old girl, were stabbed in broad daylight in Leicester Square. We'll be getting the latest on that story in just a moment. And a former MI6 officer warns that Nigel Farage may be on a watch list and scrutinised following rioting across the UK. If this is true, security services could be in the breach of the Wilson Doctrine. Plus, rows have erupted in a small Norfolk village over the Union flag. And some say it signifies nationalism and is a symbol against immigration. Of course they do. Well, we'll be speaking to a former MP who called for the former government to create a minister for the protection of flags. So we've got an action-packed show, and it's your show as much as mine, so please do get in touch with your thoughts on tonight's topics by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Get them in, and I'll read out the best before the end of the show. But before we get cracking, it's your headlines. Here's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much and good evening to you. The top story at 7 o'clock, well, a man has been arrested in central London after two people, including an 11-year-old girl, were stabbed today. The child and a 34-year-old woman were taken to hospital, but their injuries aren't thought to be life-threatening. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is in Leicester Square for us tonight.
Well, late this afternoon, the Metropolitan Police released some important new information about this attack, that neither the suspect nor the two victims here appear to have been known to each other. Well, we spoke to Abdullah, who was a security guard in one of the nearby premises here, that ran on hearing the screams out to subdue this attacker and bring him to the ground. This is what he told us.
I jumped on him, hold the hand in which he wasn't having a knife, and I just put him down on the floor and just hold him and kick the knife away from him. And then a couple of more people joined as well, and we just hold him until the police came. It took like maybe 3 to 4 minutes. Police arrived, and they just took him into the custody. And the child, just like all my colleagues, they gave him first aid.
Well, the Metropolitan Police have praised the bravery of Abdullah and others that came to the assistance of that mother and child, subduing the suspect. He is now in custody and being questioned by police. At this stage, they say there's no evidence to suggest a terrorist motivation, but they have no other indication yet as to what the motive was.
Mark White there, our Home and Security editor for us at Leicester Square. Well, turning to news in Manchester now, two people have been arrested after a man died falling from a 4th-floor balcony. A 37-year-old man and a 40-year-old woman are being questioned in Salford on suspicion of murder. More than 18,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel so far this year. That's after just over 700 people crossed on Sunday, the highest number on a single day since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. A 12-year-old boy has become the youngest person now to be charged with violent disorder after the recent riots across the UK. He admitted to violent disorder charges after throwing a missile at a police van and was also filmed kicking the window of a passing bus. The unrest broke out after the killing of 3 young girls in Southport now 2 weeks ago. And the threat of rioting on the streets across the UK has led to a 10% nationwide drop in hospitality sales. Latest figures show footfall was down by 75% in some places as businesses closed and customers stayed at home. Reportedly, coastal towns were particularly affected, especially by the cancellation of coach trips. And the Prime Minister has issued a joint statement with French and German leaders calling for a ceasefire negotiation between Israel and Hamas to resume immediately. It comes as the White House is warning Iran could attack Israel this week. Retaliations are expected over the killing of a senior Hamas member, which Israel has neither claimed nor denied responsibility for. And finally, good news if you're a fan of the heat. The UK has officially seen its hottest day of the year so far. The Met Office says a temperature of 34.8 degrees was recorded in Cambridge. Well, these elephants at Blackpool Zoo have been making the most of the warm weather, spending the afternoon cooling off in their swimming pool, lucky for some. But further north, the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for thunderstorms, flash flooding and possible travel disruption. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now, the Metropolitan Police have launched an investigation after an 11-year-old girl was stabbed in central London in broad daylight this afternoon. The child and her mother, who was aged 34, were attacked in front of shocked tourists in London's Leicester Square. A 32-year-old man has been taken into custody, and the police say they don't believe that the suspect and the victims were known to each other. Well, joining me now is GB News' reporter Adam Cherry, who's just metres away from where the incident took place. Adam, what do we know? Has anything new come out since earlier on? We know it's a 32-year-old man. We know that they weren't known. He wasn't known to the victims. Anything else come out?
That's all we know at the moment, Martin. I've been standing here for the last couple of hours and we've seen a forensics team gathering evidence on the street behind me where the stabbing itself took place and inside this venue here, this shop, where we understand paramedics treated the victims before they were taken to hospital. They have now left the scene and they've cleared out for the evening. It's still an active crime scene, of course, so it's still cordoned off and you can't enter, but they have now cleared the scene. So that's what we know at the moment. As you say, the Metropolitan Police saying they don't have an insight into the motivation for this attack. They don't believe it's terror related, but the suspect was not known to either victim.
OK, Adam, and it's important to stress, once again, as we saw in the Southport, a lot of people are speculating as to the guy's intention. We simply don't know that. We should not speculate. And the police have told us, and the government, Sir Keir Starmer, has told us, anybody spreading misinformation will be subject to the full force of the law. So we need to be very, very careful on that front until we know more about this. But, Adam, this comes 2 weeks to the day after that attack, that fatal attack in Southport. There's a feeling that our streets are simply getting out of control.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's been 2 weeks of really ugly scenes across the capital and across the country. Where we go from here, you know, I was in a Downing Street meeting, or rather a press briefing this morning, where they stressed again, as you said, that the public should be very careful about their use of social media. And the Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle, met with social media leaders last week and will continue to meet them over the coming days to discuss, I presume this event here, but also, of course, the riots over the last few weeks. Questions remain over what that means long term. Does it mean censorship? Of course, they're now pushing through the Online Safety Act, which will make social media companies responsible for the material which is posted on there, and they have a duty of care to make sure that misinformation, use their language, isn't spread, and there may be consequences to that. But for now, Martin, this is where we are. The scene here has been cleared, evidence has been gathered, and in just the last few moments we've heard the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, say that he is being briefed on this and he's being kept in the loop on this, but no further statements other than that at this time.
OK, thank you there, Adam Cherry, joining us there live from the scene of that crime in Leicester Square. And joining me now in the studio is the social campaigner Winston Davis and my panel of GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the former Conservative MP Daniel Kaczynski. I'll start with you, if I can, Winston. I know you speak a lot about rehabilitation, having offended yourself. What are your first thoughts about this? Interesting, Sadiq Khan passed the comment there, but many, many people are saying knife crime is out of control in Britain, particularly in London. These events are becoming tragically commonplace.
I mean, obviously, yeah, not a tragedy, you know, upsetting that somebody's, you know, committed this crime in central London. I think it's important what you guys just said a minute ago about re-emphasising that we don't have any information about this and speculating on it. You know, we can't do it. I'll be concerned a little bit, even though you see we're sort of dancing around, not sure what to say, whether we are being overly censored. Because there's a balance there. Obviously, you don't want people spreading misinformation, but at the same time, we live in a country where you're supposed to have free speech. But if that free speech is going to incite violence and hatred, then obviously we don't want that. But overall, though, as a country, I was looking back at the statistics on murders in this country. Over the last 15 years, we've been fairly stable, hovering around 250, 200 murders a year. I know it's not, you know, acceptable, but it's hovered around it for 15 years. It's not as if we've gone from 250 murders in 2008, all of a sudden we've got 3,000. You know, it's in and around that figure, even though we've had a growth in the population. In the last couple of years, we've actually had a 20% decrease in knife-related murders in the country.
Yeah, but we've also had a huge increase in knife-related crime where it's used, for example, robbery at knife point, mugging at knife point. So the incidence of knives coming into the spectrum of crime is greatly up. You know about young people's mindsets, you know, far better than I do, on the streets, out there. Why on earth would anybody carry a knife, and how on earth do we stamp out this cancer?
Well, somebody was talking to me about this last week and said to me, if they get out life sentences for carrying a knife, people will stop carrying a knife. But if you are a young person and you're in a particular area, and if you don't carry a knife, somebody else who could come into your contact with you could be carrying a weapon and kill you, and you believe genuinely that by carrying a weapon you're going to defend yourself, that's the only way that you can imagine that someone will want to carry a knife. So I can't get into the heads of a young person exactly why they're going to be carrying a knife, but that's the most reasonable way that that you could imagine it. For them, it's life or death. They say you can increase the prison sentence, you can increase the sentencing for it, the punishment for it. But actually, if you think you're actually going to be at harm yourself, then that's what they're considering on a daily basis. And if you look back over, again, last 12, 13 years, we've had 20,000 less police officers on the streets. We've had austerity, we've had police cuts, we've had police to the justice system, we've had explosion of the prison system. And you look back at all of those factors, I know that since 2019 they've started to increase the officers, but the ones that have been replaced are far less experienced than the ones that have left.
So you're saying this is an issue of policing, of resource. What about the mindset? What about this kind of attitude that there's no real punishment? People complain about stop and search. People say that they shouldn't be sent to prison. It won't deter them. It's a badge of honour. So what do we do? Just give them a cuddle?
I think so many factors into it. We just talked about austerity and talked about cuts, but also talk about young people, especially over these last 4 or 5 years with the pandemic. There's desensitisation, especially online. We talked a lot about online over this last week with the riots and misinformation, but there's desensitisation to life generally, and young people, are seeing more and more graphic content, more and more things which you just wouldn't see at such a young age. So then it becomes, like you said, a trend thing to carry a zombie knife, to carry something down the street. And there are people that are doing a lot of work to try and combat that, but they're not getting the funding and not getting the support.
OK, Winston Davis, thanks for your input. Let's turn to my panel now. That's, of course, Nigel and Daniel. Nigel, let's start with you. Again, I just repeat, 2 weeks of the day since we saw that tragic triple killing in Southport. Knife crime just doesn't seem to go away. How on earth can we ever stamp this out? It's fine and well for people like Winston to say, we need to talk to young people, we need to get inside their mindset. Surely the only answer is build more jails, stamp down. If Sir Keir Starmer, if Yvette Cooper can bang people up for rioting, within days of it happening, why can't we do the same with knife crime?
Well, Yvette Cooper is planning to do just that. So her idea at the moment is 13,000 more neighbourhood police and PCSOs to patrol neighbourhoods. When it comes to people carrying knives, tougher, swifter sentences. Everybody involved in a knife crime will go to a youth offender team afterwards to try and stop them doing it again. Getting rid of zombie knives online, and prosecution for people who sell them online. So the bosses of big companies could be facing
But in
some time.
Southport, it was a kitchen knife.
Pardon?
In Southport, that triple
That's
killing
right.
was
the trouble is there's nothing you can do about things like getting a kitchen knife on the high street. What you can do is limit things like machetes, zombie-style knives, ninja swords, that kind of thing. That would help. But you're absolutely right. I mean, a knife is easy to come by. We're lucky in this country up to a point that we don't have the same gun crime as America, where guns are more freely available. But knife crime is our real problem.
Daniel Kaczynski, let's bring you in here. It was a certain sense of irony, I believe, in Sadiq Khan coming out and condemning this. Knife crime in London streets, many people feel is totally out of control. And today's attack, the randomness, it appears, of it, unknown victims to the perpetrator, an act that's much, much more chilling.
Well, it's not only in the streets of London. When I represented Shrewsbury, we saw over the last few years a significant increase in antisocial behaviour on the high street, criminality. I had to spend more and more of my time as a Member of Parliament working with the Police and Crime Commissioner. There's no doubt in my mind over the last few years, I take Winston's point that we've got to get everything into context, but there's no doubt that over the last few years, I think the respect for the police perhaps hasn't been there to the degree that it should be. And that criminals have not feared sufficiently sentences this is up for debate. We need to constantly debate the powers that are given to the police and the sentences, and whether or not prisoners stay in prison, and whether or not there's enough capacity for them in prison. So Keir Starmer now, in the run-up to the next general election, which admittedly is a long way away, but this will be a fundamental issue as to whether or not he returns to power if he can deal with this situation.
Nigel, Yvette Cooper today was saying that the respect for police has been lost since the riots just 2 weeks ago. Didn't the respect for the police disappear a long time ago? The police were taking the knee in London to Black Lives Matter during the riots in 2020. Riots which, by the way, politicians of the left particularly wanted to understand and get to the bottom of and have a dialogue. No such conversation has taken place after the riots across the 7 most deprived towns in England. The 7 towns, by the way, that had the highest percentage of asylum seekers in Britain. Can I ask you, don't you think the Labour Party this time around should also be more understanding and engaging and inclusive, that word, with these communities like they were in 2010 after the riots which ostensibly affected the black community?
Which is what I think is going to happen. I mean, Labour have got enough MPs now to send them into those communities and say, right, look at the community, look at the reasons for dissatisfaction, disaffection, find out what people are actually saying and bring it back to us. But that comes next. At the moment, the first stage was to stop the riots. Fingers crossed, we seem to be getting through that with tough sentences, and the fact that they're being publicised as well as they are. Next stage is to deal with social media. Then we start dealing with any underlying causes that we need to find out.
OK, Nigel, Daniel, thank you. My panel, of course, will be back later. Winston Davis, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure to have your experience. Thank you. See you again shortly. Now, next, an ex-MI6 officer warns that Nigel Farage may be scrutinised by intelligence services following the nationwide riots. Don't miss that.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
The sunny spell that many have experienced this week makes this the perfect time to seek inspiration for fresh, beautiful food to fit the weather. Hannah Harley-Young from Crazy Sexy Food joins me once again for the latest in our Taste of Britain series. And to go alongside the return of the glorious sunshine, she recommends tequila.
To be honest with you, it's more about my total love of tequila. It is my favourite drink. I have my favourite cocktail ready to be shaked for you in a second, which is obviously the margarita. But I think also I just love this sort of general story of tequila. Tequila, a bit like with champagne, can only be produced in the region of tequila in Mexico. But I've actually brought for you, interestingly, a brand that is London-based. This was set up by Tom and Jack. They were drinking, I think, in sort of 2018, 2019, somewhere in South London, and realised that tequila could actually be quite enjoyable.
Do you know what it's made of?
It is. It's made from the blue agave plant. Now, 300 million of these plants are harvested every year. It takes between 8 to 12 years to harvest. Their tequila is made to be drank with tonic, which is not your usual accompaniment with tequila. Usually it's lime, it's a margarita. With a Blanco tequila, the idea is that the process is that once it's distilled, that is the end, it's bottled and it's sold. This is the Reposado. I haven't actually opened that, but if you do want to have a smell, you can open it. But the idea behind this is that it's been rested, so it's rested in oak barrels. I actually love people's behaviour behind tequila now. I think back in the day it had a little slightly bad rep that you'd drink cheap shots and maybe make some bad mistakes on a night out, whereas now we're actually starting to appreciate it and respect it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back now. In a controversial statement, a highly controversial statement following the recent rioting, Christopher Steele, the former head of the Russian desk of MI6, sensationally claims that intelligence services want to investigate whether Tommy Robinson and Reform MP Nigel Farage have the backing of Vladimir Putin. Both figures have faced criticism with regards to the recent rioting and have been accused of potential incitement. But Steele states that MI5 will be looking into things like their travel movements and also monetary transfers. Now, if this action is taken by MI5, it could be in the breach of the Wilson Doctrine, a convention which obstructs the ability of the police and security services from tapping phones of the members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. An astonishing story, and joining me now to discuss this is Chris Phillips, the former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris, always a delight to have you on the show. I find this story simply astonishing. The baseless allegation, the inference that this may extend to Nigel Farage, dragged into the web once again of Vladimir Putin, Russian influence, and allegations have been thrown at Nigel Farage time and time again with no proof thus far. Tell me, what do you think about this astonishing attack?
Well, I think it's a load of rubbish, to be honest, Martin. I think it's probably the Mail trying to get some headlines. Christopher Steele probably asked for a comment on all this and probably offhand mentioned something along these lines that people will be looked into. And I think it's a story of nothing, Martin, to be quite honest. Tommy Robinson will be monitored. There's no doubt about that. He's considered a bit of a problem and criminal to some. But Nigel's not said anything, I don't think, that would cause any issues with regard to this.
But, Chris, isn't the clear indication here that put these people in the same Venn diagram, Tommy Robinson, Vladimir Putin, Nigel Farage, the inference, the smear is that they're basically the same animal. That's what this is doing. And as for Christopher Steele saying that Nigel Farage is, quotes, an instigator of the recent riots, that, to me, is borderline defamatory.
I think it is defamatory, and if I was Nigel, I'd be speaking to my solicitors. Yeah, you know, we've got a load of misinformation and nonsense going on at the moment because both parties, neither party, actually want to deal with a problem that 60% of the 70% of the population feel, and there's a lot of misinformation flying about. And I think Nigel is probably, you know, I think this talk about hard right, hard left. This is, you know, there's an awful lot of people in the country that are really concerned about immigration. Both parties know that, and they're both trying to throw some muck around. And, of course, Nigel's the one that's going to get it.
And, Chris, it's worth pointing out, of course, that this conversation with Christopher Steele took place on Times Radio. It's gone out. It's now out there. And isn't this just the same old story? These allegations are thrown out. There's no proof of the allegation. But the process, the punishment is that people believe it. The smoke and the mirrors sticks. And there's no validation for it. There's no factual analysis, but it's just thrown out there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very simple thing to do, and it's throw out loads of allegations without ever backing them up. And, you know, even Boris, if you think about Boris' early days, he was supposed to have been a Russian insider, and yet he was the one that was very much in support of Ukraine. So, you know, we know these things happen, that they throw the mud out to try and get some, as you say, an inference that someone's up to no good when it's complete nonsense.
OK, Chris Phillips, the former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Thanks for joining us. And I'm still joined in the studio by GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the former Conservative MP, Daniel Kaczynski. Daniel, could I start with you? I know before we started, you said you have some pretty robust opinions on this. Fire away.
Well, I think if somebody with the former position of Mr. Steele is going to be making these sort of aspersions and casting these sort of allegations about Nigel Farage, he's got to be extremely careful, and he's got to make sure he has evidence. And we saw what happened, and you've referred to him, Aaron Banks. He took the Guardian newspaper journalist to court and won. She was found out to have just sprayed these allegations without any evidence, and she had to pay a very hefty fine. I very much hope that Nigel Farage does take action against Mr. Steele, because it's very, very damaging for the body politic. Somebody actually suggesting that what it infers is that you are betraying your country. Because at this stage, anybody with any tangential links to Putin is working in a counterintuitive way to the interests of the United Kingdom. It's a very serious allegation.
And Daniel, even more astonishing because, of course, Nigel Farage is now a sitting member of Parliament. That wasn't the case before. Nigel, for those who might not be aware of who this individual is, Christopher Steele, who is this fella?
He used to run the Russia desk at MI6, so he was quite a senior spook in his day. He then went off to a private intelligence company where he now is. And if you remember, he was responsible for the controversial dossier on Donald Trump in Russia, which caused all sorts of fuss because that none of the allegations in that turned out to be provable. So here we are again with a number of allegations being thrown around. You mentioned the Wilson Doctrine. Should MI5 ever need to investigate a Member of Parliament, has to be signed off by the Home Secretary and, most importantly, the Prime Minister. The idea that Keir Starmer would authorise an investigation into Nigel Farage with absolutely no evidence at all is just for the birds.
So that won't happen. But nevertheless, the allegation is thrown out there. Social media will do its thing. You know, the truth won't even have its trousers on before this has gone all around the world as fact. And as you pointed out, those allegations which were used politically, ostensibly and methodically for a long time against Donald Trump in America were proven to be completely baseless. And it feels like this is a similar thing, a politically motivated attack. Do you think that idea has legs?
Well, it seems to. I mean, the whole thing just seems to be, as we heard from Chris a second ago, it just seems to be nonsense because it is certainly true MI5 would looked at Tommy Robinson, not least because of his links with the English Defence League 10 years ago. They would have certainly looked at that. National Action was banned as a terrorist organisation, so that was the work of MI5. So, yes, they look at far-right people and far-right groups. What they don't do is look at sitting members of Parliament unless there is huge evidence that they're doing something on behalf of a foreign power.
And Daniel, as Nigel said, that's pretty unlikely. They would actually get the rubber stamp of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. But does it even need that? Does it even need the official acknowledgement? Because, as I just said, people will think, once again, here we go. Putin's got his claws into Nigel Farage. Once again, always in the same Venn diagram as Tommy Robinson. All of this is designed, is it not, to tarnish by association?
Well, I mean, of course, on the one hand, we have increasing evidence that President Putin is trying to, in a malign way, influence elections in Western European countries and try to influence and hack into databases, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is no evidence whatsoever that has been presented linking Mr. Farage to Putin or any of his operators. So the conduct of Mr. Steele, I agree with everybody who has spoken so far, very, very damaging to the overall integrity of Parliament and parliamentarians to make these sort of allegations without a scintilla, without a shred of evidence.
And as you say, maybe he'll be getting a nice legal letter in the post. Daniel, Nigel, thank you for your opinions. Superb as ever. Now, coming up next, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, scraps Tory plans for Brits to take priority over migrants on the social housing list. And who didn't see that one coming?
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Clear skies for many tonight will make for good viewing conditions of the meteor shower. It's going to be a fresher night as well compared to last night, but rain will spread into western areas. That's as this area of low pressure developing out to the west will drag in the next weather front. This cold front, though, still clearing across the far southeast through this evening, so still a risk of some thundery downpours, at least at first this evening, but then it will turn much drier and clearer across the whole of the UK. As I said, good good viewing conditions for the meteor shower for many of us while it's dark. Temperatures falling away a little lower than last night, quite widely, 12 to 14 degrees in towns and cities. Still a little bit hotter and more humid across the south and east, however. Now, the breeze is going to pick up across western coast through Tuesday morning. We could see some fairly heavy outbreaks of rain at first across parts of West Wales, southwest England, spreading into Northern Ireland and western areas of Scotland as well. Eastern areas, though, a bright and sunny start to the day. Temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees, with lighter winds feeling quite pleasant in that sunshine first thing. However, the winds will start to pick up across northwestern areas around this area of low pressure, western Scotland in particular, seeing a pretty breezy afternoon. And this wet weather will push further inland quite slowly, but it will continue to bring cloudier skies to much of Wales, southwest England, northern England, much of Scotland too. Turning brighter behind it across Northern Ireland, and plenty of sunshine through a lot of the day across eastern areas of England. And here temperatures still climbing towards the high 20s, so still a pretty warm day across eastern areas of England tomorrow. That wet weather will linger across eastern areas of England, though, through Wednesday morning, and elsewhere it will be a much drier and brighter day, still feeling fairly pleasant in the sunshine, but nowhere near as warm as it is at the moment. And then looking ahead to Thursday, it looks like a more widely wetter day. However, the sunshine is set to return for Friday, temperatures around average for the rest of the week.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christies. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes, she could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christies tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show now. Angela Rayner has scrapped Conservative plans to prioritise long-standing British citizens over migrants for council housing. The Deputy Prime Minister has been criticised at a move that could result in British citizens having to wait for as long as 10 years to move into subsidised housing. And this comes as HMRC data suggests that more immigrants have filled jobs than Brits in the last 5 years. Now, considering the scarcity of council housing, is this U-turn really that fair? Well, I'm still joined in the studio by GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the former Conservative MP Daniel Kaczynski. Daniel, as this was a Conservative policy that's been scrapped by Angela Rayner, let's start with you. Lee Anderson was very quick in the mix on this one, saying, here we go. Who didn't see this coming? Brits are now at the back of the queue when it comes to social housing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have to say I agree with Lee Anderson. I think certainly when I was a Member of Parliament, there was a lot of concern expressed to me by my constituents that people, in certain cases, some people who had broken the law to get into this country, paid criminal gangs money that they knew was being used for other criminal activity, that they would be treated in the same way as indigenous British people. I think that is not the case in many other European countries. I think many other European countries have special policies to prioritise their own indigenous people. So I'm very disappointed by the actions of Angela Rayner.
Nigel, wasn't so long ago, people like Gordon Brown, you say things like British jobs for British people and social housing for those who need it the most was taken as a given that Brits will be put first. A lot of people cynically said the Labour Party will put asylum seekers, they'll put immigrants before the Brits, and now they've been proven right, haven't they?
No, because they're not putting immigrants before Brits. Well, when it comes down to social housing predominantly should be allocated based on need, not based on your nationality. 90% of homes actually go to British nationals. Lots of local authorities have local connection tests if you're on the housing list.
Yeah, but that's because more than 9% of the population are British nationals. Well, the point is, disproportionately, you are considered by this new government as more worthwhile of a social house today, not the past, today, if you come from overseas and you're an asylum seeker, even if you came here illegally.
But it comes down to a question of need. You know, that is the absolute point here. If somebody is on the streets with children, a family gets priority, then they will have social housing provided, no matter where you come from, whether you're British, whether you come from abroad, that's fine. This is not prioritising asylum seekers over British people, purely those in need over somebody else.
But 10-year waiting lists, 10-year waiting lists for Brits. It's a supply and demand issue. It stands to reason. It's absolutely logical that if we have a paucity of supply of social housing and we have 18,000 illegal immigrants already this year who've arrived, they're closing the hotels, we've already been told they'll be dispersed into communities. If they're not put into social housing, they'll be put into houses that need to be bought by the government, bought by Serco. That will put prices up in communities. The net effect is a simple supply and demand issue, and that is Brits are being forced out the market.
Well, I mean, when I was at MP, I had to spend a huge amount of time trying to get a five-star hotel in the centre of Shrewsbury closed for asylum seekers, because obviously that facility was extremely important to our tourism industry. But at the end of the day, I want to drive out immigration from being in the top 5 issues at any general election. The British people are some of the most tolerant and welcoming people in the world. I speak as an immigrant to this country myself, coming from communist Poland in 1978. And all I saw when I came here as an immigrant is tolerance, kindness, hospitality from the British people. And yet, when they see a huge number of people coming from overseas, and, OK, Nigel says that they're not prioritised to a degree over British people, but at the end of the day, being treated, let's say, in the same way as indigenous British people, when the British people have to wait for such a time, that breeds a certain amount of concern and exasperation amongst our indigenous people.
Thank you for that, Dan. Let's move on to this other story on immigrant labour. Immigrants have now filled more jobs in the UK since the pandemic. 1.5 million new roles have been created since the pandemic. 488,000 of those have been filled by Indians, 279,000 by Nigerians, a 206% increase, and only 257,000 of them have been filled by British citizens. And when we look into that data, Nigel, the clear inference is this is low-paid, low-skilled work. This precisely proves, does it not, that we have an economy that's dependent on cheap foreign labour, which shoves Brits out of the job market.
Well, whether they shove Brits out of the job market or not, I don't know. But certainly we have had an economy reliant on cheap foreign labour. That's changed. That the last government changed the rule whereby shortage occupation list people could come over on 20% less, getting 20% less money than a British worker. That encouraged bosses to employ them. We've Rishi Sunak reversed Boris Johnson's reduction in skilled visa thresholds. So now it's a skilled visa. You have to be able to get the income here at the level of a British worker. The problem is not having the British workers. So we need these people for the economy, particularly in areas like social care. The building trade at the moment, they've got to build 1.5 million more houses under Labour's policies.
But people, we said during the Brexit referendum, people were saying in 2013, 2012 to me, those precise bricklayers, lorry drivers, care workers, factory workers, brickies, plasterers, sparkies, they were saying they were getting priced out of the market by the influx of cheap foreign labour. Then it was the European Union.
That's right.
Now it's the non-EU. The same problem exists, Nigel, but it's just a different way of supplying low-wage jobs, and that has the net effect, the same net effect, of making Brits unable to take that work. They have higher overheads.
But the argument from the construction trade, which at the moment only has 1 in 5 foreign workers actually doing it, from 40% during pre-Brexit, which were mostly European workers, their argument is they can't get the people. 1 in 5 construction workers are over 50. They'll be retiring soon because it's a back-breaking job. Apprenticeships are down by 1/3. So what they can't get is British workers. workers. If we're going to get into a massive house building programme, where are those people going to come from?
Daniel, before we make this too much of an attack on the Labour Party, it's fair to say the Conservative Party didn't really shower themselves in glory in terms of the number of immigrants coming into the country. Absolutely spiralled, 2 million, I believe, since the Conservatives were in power in the last 2 years before the Labour Party got in. And some of the measures here, the 20% below market rate wage for care home workers, that was a Conservative policy. So both of the main parties haven't exactly performed spectacularly in this front. But how do we get to the bottom of this? How do we stop it? Is it acceptable that we're importing the thick end of 750,000 people from India and Nigeria alone, when we've got 250,000 Brits offering the same jobs, languishing often on benefits, trapped into those low-paid jobs or on benefits in those towns that's simply withering away?
Yes, of course that's an issue and a problem. And of course, this new Labour government is going to have to really consider all the matrix of how people can apply to work and live here in the United Kingdom in order to try to bring the overall levels down. But one thing which worries me more is actually the exodus of Brits away from this country. There are now over 400,000 British professionals living in the United Arab Emirates. Some of the creme de la creme of our professional class are leaving this country to go to jurisdictions like the United Arab Emirates.
But the net immigration last year was 685,000.
Oh, yes.
So 400,000 might be, but the net impact, and they might be the highest skilled people going to the UAE. But this is about low-skilled labour coming in and hammering the working-class Brits who just can't compete.
Absolutely. Very, very high-skilled British workers are leaving and low-skilled workers are coming into the country. And, of course, you know, if it can be proved that they are reducing the wages of the sparkies, the bricklayers and the others, then there will be reverberations on that as well for this Labour government. But, of course, neither party has performed well on immigration. And one of the reasons we were kicked out of office after 14 years is because we failed to give the British people the confidence that they expected these borders to be managed and controlled and for the immigration system to work for the benefit of the United Kingdom.
And if we're allowed a conversation on immigration, that's a challenge that still faces this government, the Labour Party. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Daniel. Now, rows erupted in a small Norfolk village over whether to fly the Union flag. And we'll be hearing from some locals on this topic shortly.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Esther, can we talk about Andy Murray? Because Andy Murray has retired, which is great news. And in the papers today, his lovely wife, Kim, said, this is good, I'm glad he's retired because he can do some childcare now and a bit of housework. But you know all about relationships. Yes. This is going to be an adjustment for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you know, as a father and a husband as well, Mark, that when you are at home, you are actually a big pain in the... Because you are kind of wired and you want to be doing stuff. And Andy Murray's like goal-driven. Can you imagine? He's going to be like, I'm going to make chili con carne. I'm going to make chili like this and this. And, you know, he's going to be like so focused and he's going to have so much energy. I would be terrified to live in the same house as Andy Murray. I know he kind of comes across as quite laid back, you know. He's a bit of a Sean Connery.
But actually, these people are driven, and that's not going to stop just because he's retired, right?
OK, when you've got a driven parent and the parent is at home, they're a nightmare. Yeah. So he needs to be seriously occupied. We've got to think of some hobbies.
Isn't it Kim's turn?
To have her career?
For her to be the most important person in the house.
I think she's quite into her art and painting and things like that.
So isn't it time for him to stay at home, you know, feed the kids and all that, empty the dishwasher and let her career be the most important?
Although I doubt he'll I doubt he'll do that. He'll have so much other stuff to do, punditry. Maybe he'll join his mum. She has a tennis academy.
Actually, I remember there's a documentary about both of them have a hotel in Scotland. Actually, I think they co-run and I think they refurbished it.
Yeah.
To be fair, Kim, not just the hotel, but I'm sure she'll have other business ventures. You're right. I think it's the right thing to do. Clearly, Andy Murray has had to be out the house. Probably she's had to look after the kids. I think anyone that's at the top of their game when they retire, I think the only fair thing to do is to, as you say, maybe take a step back and support your wife.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camila Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camila Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. So today, one of locals in the rural village of Claxton in Norfolk have voiced concerns over the flying of the Union flag outside their village hall. After 2 weeks of rioting in the UK, residents of Claxton feel that a display of the Union flag could prove to be divisive and that there is a fine line between patriotism and nationalism. Now, in a bid to erect bunting instead, is this an unnecessary overreaction? Well, our national reporter Charlie Peters was in Claxton earlier today and he spoke to some locals.
The Union flag, a symbol of unity or one of division. Well, here in Claxton, a village in Norfolk, for some, the cloth of our country is considered a divisive symbol that could be associated with nationalism. In May, the Village Hall Committee for the building just behind me decided they wanted to erect a flagpole here in the centre of the village in order to display our national flag. But at a parish council meeting last month set to pass the motion, some people spoke from the floor and said that there were links with the national flag and nationalism, saying that there was a fine line between patriotism and nationalism. One man speaking for 15 minutes saying that he preferred to see bunting and not the Union flag on a flagpole due to those so-called negative connotations. Well, in this village of 300, the majority won, and the Union flag will be raised high and proud here in this village in Norfolk. And one local, Dick Thompson, gave me his response to those trying to stop the national flag from being flown.
I think I'm very patriotic. I think we should have a flagpole. Definitely want the Union Jack up when is necessary. I don't like to see lots of other flags up, I must say, but I can't see where there's any great. But there's only one or two against it. It's not everybody.
Some people have said that the Union flag could be a sign of nationalism and that it was divisive. What's your reaction to that?
Is it rubbish? That's a load of rubbish. It's not divisive. It's our flag. Every country shows their flags.
Well, other locals I've spoken to here today told me that the main complainant against the flag being displayed later turned up at a birthday party in the village. And what greeted him when he walked in? Well, a large Union flag on the wall. And sources close to the party told GB News that the man did not leave. So clearly, the national flag, in some circumstances, doesn't offend those who want to stop it from being flown on a flagpole here in Claxton.
Superb story there, and well done. Hats off to Dick Thompson. Faith and humanity restored, saying it was a load of rubbish. And a joyous part of that story is that the individual who complained, apparently at a parish council meeting, was invited to a children's party, and when he turned up, the garage was full of Union flags. He walked into his worst nightmare. He was trolled by the locals. Faith restored in humanity. And joining me now is Henry Smith, the former Conservative MP who had previously called for the government to create a minister that would protect the UK flag. Welcome to the show, Henry. Now, these kind of stories are annoyingly common. It seems to me that we have this inbuilt shame of our national flag, and how telling, Henry, that in actual fact you don't need permission to fly the pride flag in Britain, but you do need permission to fly the Union flag. Sums up Britain.
Well, I think it's very sad that we have this oversensitivity from some, and I very much agree with that villager Dick in terms of his reaction to that. Many other countries, most other countries around the world fly their national flags outside town halls, village halls. Many countries have the national flag displayed in school classrooms as well. That's an idea that I think we perhaps should visit in this country. The Union flag, the clue is in the title. It is about being united. It's about being together as a country. The flag doesn't belong to any one particular group or political party. It is something that should unite us all, and something that we should all be very proud to fly when we have an opportunity to do that. Just look at the Olympic Games, where athletes, when they won their medals, would wrap themselves in the Union Jack. Fantastic. I think we need more of that, not less.
And yet, Henry Smith, we see now the Union flag being increasingly politicised, and we've seen that happen during the recent riots. We saw a position in the past where the St George's flag was shorthand for football hooliganism, shorthand for being far right. We're seeing that at the moment on steroids. The flag is being tainted, it's being assimilated as a badge of shame. How do we kick that idea down the road? How do you make people, particularly from the political left, take pride in the national flag rather than taking pride in just the pride flag?
Well, we did see the St George's Cross in the 70s and 80s used in a negative way, but that's a great example of how the flag was reclaimed by football fans and indeed people across the country more broadly as a proud flag to fly representing England. And the same has to be for the Union Jack as well. What is quite interesting is that in the recent riots and protests that we saw, actually, in many cases, we saw both sides of those protests actually carrying Union flags. And that, I think, is a source of something to be take comfort in the fact that people feel that they want to express their being British and the values that being British means. And I think displaying the flag is something that we should all do if we want to. I display the flag as I'm doing behind me, my Union Jack blanket that I've got behind me on my sofa. It's something that I think is really important for us to be able to come together and celebrate all the good things about Britain. Britain is admired throughout the world, and the Union Jack is an iconic symbol around the world. It's actually one of the coolest symbols considered in many countries. So I think we should take pride in that and fly it very proudly outside our village halls, town halls, private homes as well.
Superb. Henry Smith, always a pleasure to have your company on the show. Thank you for joining us. Now, coming up is the State of the Nation, and I'm joined by Tom Harwood, of course, is covering for Jacob Rees-Mogg. What's on your menu?
Goodness me, well, 703 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday alone. I think there's been an eye taken off the ball here. Quite rightly, there's been a lot of things going on British soil, but actually looking at what's happened in the Channel in the meantime, we're going to turn the focus back there because there is a crisis in the English Channel. Boats coming across on a daily basis in some of the highest numbers we've ever seen. But of course, we're also going to look at the law and order breakdown in the United Kingdom, stabbings in broad daylight. We're expecting perhaps some more information on that. But also the crisis of free speech in the United Kingdom. Tonight, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, sits down with potentially the next president of the United States, Donald Trump, in a live interview. It's 1 a.m. our time, but I wonder, will they touch upon what's happening in the United Kingdom? It seems to be occupying a lot of Elon Musk's time and mind.
And we've got a quick second. Do you think the Labour Party is going to put draconian free speech laws in place in Britain?
I think there will be one thing that they will do very quickly. Do you remember the legal but harmful clause of the Online Safety Act? That was taken out by the Conservatives. I think the Labour Party are going to put it right back in there. There are policy experts who expect that to happen really bloomin' soon, and that's going to have a very chilling effect on legal but harmful speech.
Super stuff. Tom Harwood, that's next on State of the Nation. Thanks for joining me. We'll be back at 3 o'clock tomorrow on the Martin Daubney Show, but first it's your weather with Annie Shuttleworth. Have a great evening.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office.